for you guys, what do you think is more important for defense's success in the NFL? Coverage or pressure on the passer?
So for me, and I haven't studied this, I guess. Like I don't have an exact science here, but I've always been more of a pressure guy, and I guess a few reasons. One is just the traumatic experience of watching Aaron Rodgers and I guess the whole 2011 playoffs, and watching what the Giants defensive line with four guys did was just unbelievable. And I could name a defense every year that I would watch, and all they would do is just send four guys, and it doesn't, obviously it matters a little bit who's back there, but if you throw four guys and they can consistently get pressure with just them four, that makes the back end so much easier. And I think all the good defenses that or legendary defenses of the 2010s have had that, and they've carried games. I think the 2015 Broncos is the example here. You look at that offense, and they didn't really do much in the Super Bowl, but Von Miller scored a touchdown himself. They forced multiple fumbles, played outstanding, and it was because they had Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware coming off the edges, Malik Jackson and Derek Wolfe playing incredible and just pushing the pocket back. And when the quarterback only has a few seconds and they can't go anywhere, and they're it doesn't even matter if they're mobile because the whole pocket's just collapsing. And I think it helps the coverage a lot in the sense that they have less time to cover. Now the opposite's true with coverage. If you have a great secondary and linebackers, you can help the pressure get there. But I've always been more of just pressure hurts the quarterback more, I guess, than a really tough coverage.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'd go pressure 100%, and I think it's not. I think pressure would win by if you asked anybody this question 10 years ago, I think pressure would win by far. I think now it's becoming more of a debate, but I still think it's pressure. Blake named a lot of examples, right? You can even look at the 2012 Seahawks or 2013 Seahawks, the Legion of Boom. Everybody wants to talk about the Legion of Boom and Bobby Wagner, but that defense started up front. Michael Bennett was one of the 5 or 6 best defensive linemen in the NFL at that time. Chris Averill was a dominant defensive lineman. Those guys, their defense started up front. And, I think that when it comes to drafting and stuff and all of that, I think kind of where this question is heading in terms of roster building, I do think coverage is very important. I think a cornerback is one of the 4 premium positions in the NFL. I would just value a great edge rusher and a great pass rusher first. And what it comes down to, honestly, for me, is that if you have a great pass rush, you can protect both your corners. A great corner cannot protect a mediocre pass rush because you can only guard one side of the field. A great pass rusher, like if you have Nick Bosa and 2 mediocre corners, if Nick Bosa gets pressure, both those corners are protected. If you have Jalen Ramsey and the Titans defensive line minus Jeffrey Simmons from last year, Jalen Ramsey can cover for 5 seconds, but that other corner on the other side is going to get beat at some point because you can't get pressure on the quarterback. So for me, it starts with pressure and it still remains pressure. And I still think it is still a definitive answer.
So to me, I'm going to disagree with you guys on this one. And I think it's a really interesting discussion. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer for this because there's multiple different types of ways to win in the NFL. But to me, the thing that sets me over the edge with coverage is I kind of took it a different way than you did, Vish. I think what you said is perfect and is absolutely right. I would prefer one great edge rusher over one great corner. But I think in terms of the groups as a whole, I would prefer more good corners than a group of good pass rushers. And the reason why is that with a good group of corners, you can make up for a lackluster pass rush with the coverage you have on the back end. And with the NFL going so much more towards passing, I look at teams like the Dolphins and the Patriots are perfect examples of this. They've shown that if you can cover players in that, if you can just focus on coverage as much as possible with your corners, you can be really successful and you can find different ways to get pressure. And that's the other thing too, I think that really set me over the edge because I was pretty close on this issue. I think with pressure, you can do different things to create pressure. You can get creative with it. You can use safeties, you can use linebackers, you can use corners, but I don't think there's anything that makes up for a lackluster corner play. So that's kind of where I landed with this issue. But I think you guys brought up some great points, and I could be swayed either way with this kind of thing.
So where I'll say is the two examples you brought up is Patriots and Dolphins. You're talking about two guys in Brian Flores and Bill Belichick who schematically do a phenomenal job mugging fronts and all of that and creating pressure and simulating pressure and all of that. And then in the back end, they do a really good job with pattern matching man coverages and all of that. But like you look at then a guy who's from the same system, runs the same system, and had good cover players in Detroit while running that system, but still struggled to cover people in Matt Patricia because they couldn't rush the passer. It's the same thing. I mean, Romeo Crennel, he's also struggled for years doing it. Eric Mangini, we saw with the 49ers, without a pass rush, he struggled a little bit, but then he also didn't have great corners. So it's a little twofold. But I think the one thing, if you look at if you can get pressure on the quarterback, that translates because you talked about you can't overcome that poor corner play. I'd argue you can because you're constantly playing zone coverage. And when you're playing very, very technically sound zone coverage and you know you only have to cover for 2 or 3 seconds, you can be a really, really dominant defense.
I think that's a super fair point to bring up. And I think with this discussion in whole, this is one of the more interesting topics for the next 5 years in the NFL, just to see the way that teams build through the draft and the kind of players that they value. Vish, you brought up an excellent point, which I want to get back to, which is corner, positional value for corner. It should be one of the most valued positions in the NFL. Now, Blake, you know, the Packers, they seem to be doing a better and better job of that, especially in the last
We have one
drafts.
guy.
Yeah, but even then,
Kevin King wasn't bad either.
No, but
Right.
if you look at their draft, they're trying to address that issue. They're doing things to try and get better at coverage. If you look at the 49ers on the other hand, they don't really invest in the corner position almost at all. I mean, they did this season, but even then they picked a guy at 102, and you can't really get great corners unless you get them within the first 40 picks of the draft. So I think this is a really interesting thing because on the one hand, like with the 49ers, they were able to be so successful with their pass rush in the 2019 season, especially that defensive line. It was so dominant. And then you look at a game like the Super Bowl and what happened with the Chiefs. And when you can't cover a guy like Tyreek Hill, it becomes a huge issue.
Yeah, so, but nobody can cover him, right? Mahomes torched the New England Patriots that you mentioned in the second half of that football game too. So, I mean, the bottom line of this discussion to me is that you need both. You need to be able to cover and you need to be able to rush the passer. It's like, would you rather have a team that can run the football or would you rather have a team that can throw the football? Neither is winning. You need to be both. So I